This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Dash Shaw. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this episode, I have the pleasure of talking with Dash Shaw. His new book, Cosplayers, was just released from Fantagraphics. But before we get to that conversation, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find discounts at 20 to 35% off cover price. And every single month, you're going to find specials that go beyond that. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off cover price, sometimes 50% off cover, but often you can find discounts that go higher from there.
That's right. And since you're interviewing Dash Shaw on today's episode, I mentioned that DCB Service has a bunch of Dash Shaw's books for 35% off, including the Cosplayers collection, as well as the upcoming Cosplayers Christmas special. So you can get a nice discount on the latest works by Dash Shaw.
That's right. What better way to get to know the work of Dash Shaw than getting his comics through our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com. They'll take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
Andy, I had a great time talking with Dash, and I'm sorry that you couldn't join us, but the timing just wasn't working.
Yeah, I'm disappointed that I didn't get a chance to. Also, I got to meet Dash Shaw a few years ago at an ICAF, and he was great to talk to. So, I'm interested in hearing what you two got to talk about.
Yeah, we had a great conversation, and I hope to meet him in the not-too-distant future as well. He did inform me, as you'll hear in this interview, that he will be in Austin, Texas, not too long from now to showcase his upcoming film, My Entire High School is Sinking into the Sea. I hope I'm able to make it out there.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to see that whole movie.
Yeah, but we talked about that movie, but we also talked about his comics and, of course, the new book, Cosplayers. So let's get to that conversation now.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm here with Dash Shaw. His new book, Cosplayers, The Perfect Collection, comes out in bookstores this week, although comic shops may have had their copies a little sooner. Dash, welcome to the Comics Alternative.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, I've been following your work for years, since your first book, Mother's Mouth, and one of the things that strikes me is that your subject matters vary widely, that with each book you come out with, you seem to tackle a different subject than you did in the previous works. So when it comes to cosplaying, what was it about that activity that you wanted to focus in on these series of stories?
It was a combination of things. Obviously, from going to comic festivals for a long time, starting at a young age, I would see cosplayers. And so it was kind of connected to comics fandom, which of course I'm a huge part of, and especially when I was a teenager and kind of anime conventions were a big part of my teenage life. So it was around and I always liked it. And then something clicked where I started thinking about it in a deeper way, where I liked how it was kind of a merging of fantasy with reality, and how it's kind of pulling things from the world of imagination and kind of a DIY way of bringing these things from the imaginary world into our world. And then also, when I thought about drawing them, it became interesting because you're drawing these characters that originate in drawings. They originate as black ink on paper and these flat kind of poppy colors. But it's been filtered through reality of these people who are dressing as them and kind of their unique interpretation of those characters, and then I would turn it back into ink drawings on paper with these poppy colors. So when it was enough things around it that I thought was interesting and kind of like There was something intriguing there about it to me that was worth, exploring with in a comic form. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of you can have an idea that might seem fun, but then drawing it is a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of energy, and your time is limited, and so the things that you decide to do comics about have to have some extra ingredient in it that is maybe difficult to articulate, but is thrilling or inspiring or engage or remains interesting to you. That it isn't easily placed. Like if I had an idea that I immediately understood, then it wouldn't maybe be engaging enough to draw a whole comic about. But these cosplayers, these characters, these situations, there was enough in there that I could chew on it.
Now, we should mention, for those who aren't familiar with any of your cosplayer stories, that they primarily revolve around two characters, Annie and... How do you pronounce her name? Verti? Verti, yes. And they meet. Annie is a cosplayer, and Verti is an aspiring filmmaker. And so she wants to record Annie not only cosplaying, but also taking her cosplaying into particular scenarios, real-life scenarios. At least that was the gist of your first cosplayer story that came out, I think, in April of 2014, the comic book Cosplayers #1.
Yeah. Well, they meet at Otakon, which is a major anime convention where there's a lot of people go to. I was actually a gopher at Otakon when I was in high school, and I met Frederick Schott, I think, or Schott. I don't know how you pronounce his last name. The manga scholar and. Anyway, the idea of them taking photos, but then going a step further into staging scenarios, I thought was relevant because of it highlighting this more bringing fantasy into the real world part of cosplay that I find interesting. And then also, so much of it is related to comic fandom, but it's also film fandom, and television show fandom and kind of popular culture. So it's their way of participating in media, basically, by making these videos, these short films that we don't really see, but we kind of hear about them making. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, I remember when that first issue of Cosplayers came out a couple of years ago, we reviewed it on the Comics Alternative, and one of the things that really struck us was, I think when we saw this first issue solicited, our assumption somewhat was that you would be... if not making fun, then being a little playful with cosplayers or the very concept of cosplaying. But then we read that first issue, and I remember commenting about this on that episode, that, you know, you're quite serious about this community, this activity, reverential at times. In other words, you take it very serious, and at no point with the cosplayers themselves, and specifically Annie and Verti, do you hold them up for ridicule?
Yeah, it wouldn't be a motivation that I would have, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, the way that it's drawn, I don't think that it's completely, like, when I draw the cosplayers, it isn't like I draw them, like, very cutesy, you know? So it isn't immediately, like, wholly positive, but it also isn't like the Dan Clowes kind of Dan Pussy stories where they're in a kind of grotesque light. So it isn't completely negative. You know, I like those characters, but I feel like the way I drew it is maybe, you know, like neutral positive or something like it. Like, I think it's whole, you know, the stories are funny, but they're not making fun of them.
Right.
It's in an in-between area that I found interesting, but is maybe difficult to place. But because it's difficult to place, that's what makes it interesting. Because obviously, I you know, characters have positive and negative, or it's not even positive and negative isn't even like a right way to scale someone's traits. You know, they're complicated. They hold a lot of different different traits inside of them. So
mm-hmm.
the perspective of the book is maybe I don't know. It's maybe for someone else to say, but I would say perspective is like neutral positive or something.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense to me. And in fact, you mentioned Daniel Clowes. I mean, I couldn't help after reading the Collected Cosplayers, the book that has just come out, think of Ghost World. In terms of the relationship between your two protagonists, Annie and Verti.
Yeah, that's true. That's something that people told me as soon as the first issue came out, that they were similar, and that wasn't intentional. But when I came to do the second issue, I thought it would be funny or more or kind of like delusional to try to make it a bit more like a Clowes comic rather than less. Mm-hmm. So the second issue has like this manga scholar character who's very Clowesian. Yeah, I mean, I love Ghost World. I didn't like reread it or study it or anything, but I certainly I think he's fantastic.
Right. And, you know, but one of the differences between not only Ghost World, but other Clowes kind of characters and your Annie and Verti is that Annie and Verti seem to have a direction. They know what they want to do. And every now and again, they may question their attempts or their goals, but they have a particular game plan. In other words, they're not wandering from one idea to another. They're not aimless. That, I think, is something that we find more in the character, that manga scholar you mentioned, Baxter, who shows up in that second issue of Cosplayers that also came out in 2014. Now, you mentioned earlier that you had met Frederick Schott at a con.
Oh, it isn't based on him.
but I mean,
that's where you're going.
Oh, I was wondering if this was a commentary, not maybe necessarily on a particular individual, but on scholars in general.
No, I just kind of thought, like, what would Clowes think of me if I didn't make fun of this scholar? You know?
Oh, okay.
But I really relate to him because probably maybe more than the other characters because I love Tezuka, and I feel like if I wasn't drawing comics, I would be writing about comics. I wrote about comics for the comics blog, and like very rarely I'll write. I consider myself a student of comics history, and I've always been interested in it, and so I love like comics critics, and I mean I think it's clear when you read it that it's in jest, or kind of like it's ridiculous that this cartoonist would draw this kind of self-hating critic in this way. I just think it's kind of funny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think yeah.
Yeah. Well, as a comic scholar, I thought it was hilarious.
Great.
And I mean, I didn't take offense at all. If anything, I think that those in academia need a few more darts thrown at them in a good natured way, of course.
That's what Dan Nadell said. It was kind of like accurate or something. I forget what he said. But another thing that when I turned in that first Cosplayers issue, Eric Reynolds at Fantagraphics said that it was similar to Ghost World, but that the differences were kind of revealing or telling that the Ghost World characters were, kind of hated popular culture, while the Cosplayers characters really loved popular culture. That they were kind of opposites in all of these different ways. Besides I'd never thought about the Klaus characters as directionless before. Certainly not in the new book. Mm-hmm. In the new book, the guy has one direction.
Right.
There's a lot of it certainly made me wish that mine was drawn a lot better, because the Ghost World drawings are beautiful, and the cosplayers' drawings and that kind of, I don't know. I think if you held it up, the drawings don't hold up. If you held them side by side, the cosplayers' drawings have more of a clip arty kind of thing, but that's also part of that remove that it has.
Well, let's talk about the style in Cosplayers, because one of the things that I have noticed, especially since your book New School, which came out in 2013, that there seemed to be a noticeable, if not shift, then a different tendency in your art style from the earlier books like The Bottomless Belly Button or Body World. And what I mean by that, you're doing more with color, you're playing around with background images and even collage in a way that you hadn't before. And so some of the things that I first started to notice in New School, and then that comic book 3 New Stories, and even into Doctors from a couple of years ago, I definitely see come to the fore in your cosplayer stories that we have collected here in the new book.
Do you mean in the drawings or just the color, or what do you mean?
I think both the drawings and the color. In other words, The Bottomless Belly Button, one of your earliest works, and in fact that may have been where I first saw your comics, through The Bottomless Belly Button. I think that the style, if I go back and look at it now and try to pair it with what I see in cosplayers, it seems as if there are two artists in some ways there. And I think part of it may be in the drawing style, but it especially comes out in your use of color and of even collage that you use in the background of many of your stories. Like I said, I noticed this especially with New School, but it's very much a part of cosplayers.
Well, I'm maybe not the best person to. I'm either the best or the worst person to talk about this because I'm inside of it, So these changes, an obvious change is that I'm getting older and going through life and kind of becoming more engaged in different parts of this medium. You know, if you looked at things that I was doing in college before Bottomless, they were strange color experiments, and so there's that, and then also, for me, the story dictates the graphics, and when I have a story idea, I might not know what to do with it, but then when I have enough kind of other elements to give me an idea of how to proceed, then I can move forward. And so with Cosplayers, you know, I had this idea of these characters and the situation, and then I thought, well, it makes sense to do a pamphlet comic to kind of put them on the racks next to these, next to their characters that they're fans of. So you would go to the comic shop and you'd see Batman and Superman, and then you'd see people cosplaying as Batman and Superman. And then it became, well, those commercial comics are inked with a brush line, and they're like computer colored, and they have often this kind of handwritten font. So that kind of created these other rules for that story. And then I know I would kind of fail at looking like a commercial comic, but that failure would be interesting, or maybe would somehow relate to how a character will dress as Batman, but get something wrong. You know, quote, like not have the right color cape or something, that it would be like striving but a little off, and that there would be the human element of it being off would makes it more interesting and moving, and part of that combination of reality with fantasy. So there has to be aspects about how the story is executed that makes the story more meaningful. So there being a break, I guess, between I don't really think back on, I kind of remember like the way New School was drawn was very inspired by this comic I had done called My Entire High School Sinking into the Sea, that was in Mome, and it was in an Unclothed Man collection. And so it was kind of colored in the same way, and the lines, I realized that the lines had to be thicker to stand out against the color, because the colors were so strange. When the lines were thin, they got lost. So that kind of led to a kind of thick line, kind of, it almost looks like coloring book lines, where the lines have to be thick, where a kid can scribble over them, but they're still legible as whatever the drawing is of.
Right.
And branching from that high school sinking story into thinking about color as almost like a film score, where it's this separate element that's kind of smashing into the narrative of the story, where it's two tracks that, and the clashing or the juxtaposition of those two tracks create a third thing that is the experience of the comic, was super exciting. You know, really, really. I remember just being thrilled with kind of that mode, or I felt like I was tapping into some kind of non-literal experience. And then it kind of went away, and then the doctors was, each page was a different scene, and so kind of color coding the pages helped communicate that. So even if you flipped through the book, you'd kind of see that this book is really a collage of these different scenes or ideas, kind of juxtaposing ideas page to page. Cosplayers, I didn't. When I was working on it, when it got to the what became the near final book or comic in the story, the Escape from Nostalgia World, where the characters are cutting up comics and kind of reconfiguring them, which was basically how Doctors was made. Doctors was a lot of the images from Doctors was pulled from old romance comics or kind of advertising imagery, kind of clip art looking imagery. Well, when I got to that story at Cosplayers, I thought, oh, this is what this collage element is what seals the deal to this story in my mind, or the way that they're using these things from popular culture but making it their own. That when it came time to do the collection, I tried to highlight that collage aspect more. So the Perfect Collection has more collages in it, and I try to use actual comic panels earlier in the book. And so I redrew the first story and kind of put some collage-like elements into the first stories to try to make it feel like one consistent book or one consistent idea.
Right, yeah. One of the first things I noticed in the Cosplayers book was certain images, like, for instance, the cover image of the first comic book issue of Cosplayers is not as it appeared originally, in that it had been cut up and placed collage-like over other images. And I particularly appreciated that because, if for no other reason, and you mentioned the thematic link, right, with that story, Escape from Nostalgia World, but it also gives this new hardbound collection a different feel than the earlier manifestations in the comic book.
Right, yeah, of course I wanted it to be a different new thing, you know?
Mm-hmm. So now you were talking a little earlier about your decision to begin Cosplayers in comic book form, where they could possibly be on the stand beside mainstream comics there. So there'd be someone cosplaying a particular hero, and then right next to your issue of Cosplayer would be the comic book based on that particular hero. Were there any other decisions that went into starting Cosplayers as a comic book and not as, let's say, a completed book form, or even maybe something that you would collect in various anthologies here and there?
Well, no, I mean, the main idea was to have it be a pamphlet to exist alongside those other pamphlets, but also I didn't know if I had more stories with those characters yet. So I had done that first story that's kind of them meeting, and then I had another idea for a story, and then a third idea, and then I kind of looked at it. I thought, oh, this is, it wasn't so much a game plan. And then when I had the first issue, I thought that would be it. I didn't think I would do any more stories with those characters. But then I thought, oh, you could do an issue that would be entirely at an anime convention, and it could be like these remote kind of hotel, sparsely attended conventions that I remember from my youth, and I had so many memories of going to those conventions that it kind of wrote it itself, And I think if you've attended a lot of conventions, you can see from Tezucon that I've attended a lot of conventions. There's repeating. It's just like classic kind of situations that happen at conventions, especially ones that are like don't have a lot of people and are in some hotel in the middle of nowhere.
Right, and that idea for Tezucon was the gist of issue number 2 of Cosplayers. Yeah,
that was that a whole issue would just be a convention. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a game plan. I would just, whenever I had an idea, I kept having ideas with those characters. And then even when I finished this Perfect Collection book, I still had a few other ideas with them. So there's something in, you guys talked about, the smoke signal, short story. I did something for Dome, a one-pager for an anthology called Dome, and then there'll be another pamphlet comic that comes out later this year. That's the Christmas special. That's them getting. So one of them it dresses as Indiana Jones, and so the other has to get a holy grail to give to her. So it's about making a holy grail item because I thought it would be cool. You know, A Charlie Brown Christmas is one, I think, like the greatest movie ever made, and I love the just doing like a straight, sincere Christmas story. I thought would be interesting, and then also I realized I didn't have a good story about making one of the items, like making a suit, you know? Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a mistake, that obviously that's a huge part of cosplaying, is constructing these items that I needed a story about that. So that'll be in the Christmas special. And in the French edition, those Christmas comics are in the whole Perfect Collection book, because apparently they don't have Christmas specials in France.
So you mentioned this Cosplayers Christmas special, and then the story in the most recent issue of Smoke Signals. So this is going to be, let me ask, is this going to be an ongoing concern of yours when every now and again when the muse hits you, you're plan on doing more cosplayer stories, maybe like you started out, just doing them whenever you thought about it?
Yeah, I'm not ruling it out. I don't have any other ideas right now. Mm-hmm. But I'm not ruling it out. Yeah, I've certainly drawn more comics with those characters than I thought I would at the beginning. I thought it would just be one story.
Yeah. So for all we know, the more recent stories, the cosplayer stories, the Christmas special, and then that which was in Smoke Signal, may be the last of it, but maybe not. Maybe a couple of years from now, we could be talking about Volume 2, hardbound, perfect collection of cosplayers.
Yeah, maybe.
So one story that is in this new book was not in either of those single comic book issues, the pamphlets, but was part of Fantagraphics Free Comic Book Day issue 2015. This is the story Escape from Nostalgia World, where you were in Ed Pisker's Hip Hop Family Tree 3-in-1 for Free Comic Book Day. So how did you get nestled into that Free Comic Day book?
Well, I think I forget. I have a version in my mind of how it happened, but it might be wrong. I think what happened is that the Free Comic Book Day people rejected cosplayers as a single item because it wasn't connected to a property. And so then Fantagraphics asked Ed if they could put it in with the Hip Hop Family Tree, which are hugely successful. And Ed was a saint and said yes, which was really... I'm very thankful for, because I had already drawn it, expecting it to be, the part of the whole story was that it would be a Free Comic Book Day comic, because it's about these characters going into a comic shop and the store owner giving them a comic for free. So at the beginning, the plan was to have it on Free Comic Book Day, but we had to maybe sneak it in through Ed's comic to get it to be a part of that, I'm going to say holiday. I don't know. I was going to say holiday, but I don't know if Free Comic Book Day counts as a holiday.
Well, I guess for some people.
An event.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I really enjoyed that story, and it's kind of like with what I was saying when I read the first solicit for Cosplayers issue number 1, is that there would be the potential here in your story, Escape from Nostalgia World, to make fun of the comic shop owner. I mean, but you don't do that. I mean, right? That's something like you would find on The Simpsons with the comic book man. But this guy, who's a little off, does have a serious take on comics, and the way that you treat his ideas is rather respectful. And this also involves Kirby's 2001.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I mean, similarly to how, I'd had all these experiences at these kind of remote conventions and felt like I had a lot of memories and story ideas there that I hadn't, whenever I'd seen in the comic convention in media, it was always like a giant San Diego Comic-Con story. And I knew that there was a different kind of convention that I thought it would be cool to do a story about. With the Free Comic Book Day comic, that Simpsons comic book guy exists in popular culture as the comic shop owner that's snobby and grouchy and mean. But there's also these people that I love deeply that are like, they have a store that, you don't know when the hours are kind of iffy. You don't know how they stay open. They're just kind of, they collect these strange items, that they look like this guy from Escape from Nostalgia World, who is like deeply in love with comics and believes in them and kind of teaches the kids who come into the comic store about comics and is kind of these weirdos that I really love, that are fascinating and I'm really glad that comics has those people.
yes, and one of the things that struck me as interesting in that story, Escape from Nostalgia World, is when the shop owner is telling Annie and Verti his philosophy behind comics. He uses as an example a comic that you probably wouldn't even find in the vast majority of comic shops, and that is Frank Santoro and Ben Jones's Cold Heat #4.
Yeah, well, I picked Cold Heat because I wanted it to be a comic that I really loved. Mm-hmm. That 2001, and I didn't want. I don't know. I felt like if I picked a comic that I couldn't get behind that way, it wouldn't ring as true, maybe, or I don't know. There's something in it where I thought this is a love letter to these people, but also those kind of people are, like, I don't want to say the character is directly inspired by anyone because I don't know, because it isn't based on anyone. But that store owner is the same age as Gary Panner, was born in 1950, and kind of. Gary talks about comics in a way a little bit similar to that guy. Mm-hmm. There's maybe some kind of specific things that he said that comics are a way of altering people's consciousness. That you kind of send a signal out through this item, and you see how it alters popular culture. So, Gary is obviously a huge influence on Cold. Oh, I don't know. Frank and Ben Jones could maybe say what they're influenced by, but it felt appropriate to me. And I mean, 2001 obviously is extremely appropriate with it's fantastic that it's Kirby, and it's also about these monoliths that change the course of time, and it's just a perfect merging of different talents and ideas to create this amazing comic book that I felt like was the perfect book for him to explain his philosophy of comics.
Now, you mentioned a little while ago the Mome story, My Entire High School is Sinking into the Sea. Now we should mention that you have made this into an animated film now, and this will be shown at the Toronto International Film Festival.
Yes, and you said you're in Texas?
Yes, I'm in the Dallas, Texas area.
So it's maybe by the time this airs, it'll be announced. But we're also going to play at Fantastic Fest, which is in Texas.
Oh, we're in Texas.
It's in Austin, Texas.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's several hours away, but would probably be well worth the trip.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm going to go to Fantastic Fest. It's run by Alamo Drafthouse.
Oh, okay.
But yeah. No, we're starting to play film festivals. It's pretty wild.
Well, tell me a little bit about that experience of taking one of your shorter comics and then turning it into a longer animated film.
Sure. Well, I guess it's. I can. There's so much different stuff to say about it.
But this is. We should say this is not your first work in animation, though.
No, I had done. I'd done a lot of animation work. You know, it was in Moam, but then it was collected into this book called The Unclothed Man in the 35th Century AD, which was a half animation art book / collection of my comic short stories that came out in 2009, and that was for this web series I did for IFC that ran on the IFC channel. Kind of between movies, I made all these animated shorts, and so after that, I started trying to make an animated movie, and it just. I went to the Sundance Film Labs and all this different stuff happened. But then finally, I have this thing done in 2016. And why that story? Well, I liked if you read that short story, it isn't much. Essentially, it's just like a parody of Titanic that's kind of drawn in this weird way and. But I thought it was a funny title. I liked it that it was a combination of autobiography and kind of boy's adventure or adventure, story. I thought it would be a cool, I thought there was more there. And so, years passed and for some reason I kept thinking about that story, and then other little ideas got added to it, like making it about these writers. I was on a school newspaper in middle school, and I had, friends with the other people on the writing club or whatever. And I had a lot of positive positive memories of that time. I remember conflicts inside of the club. And then I had the idea that the school would be, that each floor would be a different grade, that it would be freshman, sophomore, junior, senior floor as you ascend. And so that idea then led to it sinking, moving up through the floors. And it gave the whole thing more of like a video game-like structure where I could take the whole school experience and place it into this heightened, dramatized, action kind of setting, but keep it still about school. So like, on the center floor would be the cafeteria where, just like in the middle of the school day, you have a gathering at a cafeteria of all of the students. But in this setting, it would be a disaster relief ward. So all of the students have gathered and are kind of deciding about what to do as the school is sinking. And I just kept getting more ideas. And it also felt like of all of the different ideas I had, it felt the most doable as an animated movie drawn, low budget to say the least, like starting to just start drawing something, just because I knew that a lot of the backgrounds would be the interiors of the school. I felt like, I know how to paint that, I can paint like a room and acrylic paints and some desks. And then as the school sinks, the backgrounds could get more abstract. And I thought I know how to do that. And the it felt like, there wasn't a lot of elements about the story that would be really difficult for me to paint. But other people came on board High School Sinking later. People I know from alternative comics paint kind of special sequences. Laura Konetzker does a flashback sequence. Andrew Lorenzi does some sequences. Bjorn Miner. These are
so it's not just your animation. So it's not just your animation. It's others as well.
They're kind of cast in it. Like when you see it, there'll be a flashback sequence in the middle of this movie that has paintings by someone else. Oh. And a lot of the animation is, so I wrote and directed it, but I thought of it like how Ralph Bakshi would cast different artists to do like the backgrounds for one sequence. Okay. Do you know? So I tried to kind of cast different artists like how you would cast an actor to come on board and help you out. You know, the exterior of the school, the main exteriors are by Frank Santoro from Cold Heat. Curtis Godino did these fantastic liquid light show effects. Of course, Jane Samborski is the lead animator and penciled a lot of the... I feel like it's maybe bad to list off names because I'm going to forget someone and feel bad, but it became a slightly larger production. I mean, and the actors, we got the greatest cast in the world to come on with Jason Schwartzman plays the Dash character. Reggie Watts and Maya Rudolph are on the school newspaper club. Lena Dunham plays this other character who's kind of the class president. And Susan Sarandon plays the lunch lady. Thomas J. Ryan, a great actor, plays the principal. So it's other people. Definitely, film is a large collaborative experience, but this was still, like a small movie, certainly by any animated movie that I'm aware of. Animated feature-length film.
Do you see yourself doing more of these feature-length animated films in the future, taking some of your other stories and making them into not just short films, although possibly that, but even longer stories?
I have one that I'm working on right now. That's a second feature. So I'm storyboarding it, and it's not based on a comic. I feel like I'd like to just keep going, doing what I'm doing, which is working on comics and then also making these independent movies.
Now, you mentioned storyboarding. Let me ask you, as someone who has done a lot of work in comics and now in film, I've always heard people, when they talk about storyboarding and describing the process, saying, it's a lot like doing comics. Is that the case?
Well, I certainly thought that when I started, and I always loved looking at storyboards, and especially there's an animatic for the Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind. If you get it on the Disney DVD release, there you can watch. I think it's the pencil test, or maybe it's the storyboard. The anime. Well, I loved that. I watched that. I almost think it's better than the finished movie. It's a separate disc on that set. But obviously, like Saul Bass storyboards and all of these things that as a kid, I loved looking at making, the making of some movie kind of, but the Art of Pinocchio kind of books and looking at the storyboards. So when I started making animations, I thought, well, I can draw, I can tell stories. Like I have a scanner right here. I don't need a multi-plane camera. Like, I should really be able to use all of these skills that I have to make animations. But as I started working on them, especially feature-length movies, I really realized that this requires a lot of skills that I don't have. That there are social, interpersonal skills involved, and even the storyboards are in the service of a time-based medium. That's really the biggest difference, that comics are about simultaneity and juxtapositions, and time has been flattened onto a page. Mm-hmm. While film, you're really imposing your sense of time on the viewer, and it's more like telling a story vocally, in that I can alter the spacing between my words and create suspense in how I'm speaking, and I'm choosing the order of the sentences and the order of the events to kind of, wrap the listener in. While that time-based quality is a different skill set entirely, I think, than comics. Comics, you can leave a main character for 10 pages and then join them, and the reader will go with you. If you leave the main character in a movie for 10 minutes and you're following someone else, you immediately wonder, why are we following this other person? There's some kind of it's startling how a movie can change, and you can completely lose a viewer. Just in a split second, someone can become bored. I don't know. It's pretty. I guess the point is, like, I thought that they would be more similar than they are. They're very different, they're different mediums completely.
Yeah. Well, are there things that you have learned in filmmaking that you think make you a better comics artist?
Well, the first thing that pops into my head, which might sound like a joke, is that I've had to interact with a lot of people, and kind of had to do things outside of my comfort zone. That's things that I wouldn't have had to do if I was just drawing comics. And so those experiences, I think, have changed my comics. And then also editing, and that seeing how films are made to be malleable, basically, that in the editing room, and has now, when I approach comics, I'm thinking about how can I draw this in a way that if I need to add a scene somewhere, I can do that. If I need to put in a new word balloon, I just, it's no longer this like a page is done as soon as I draw it kind of thing. It's very much like I try to shape it when I know all of the elements that I have at the end. I mean, Doctors, especially, when each page was a different scene, I would kind of lay them out and try to get that story as tight as possible. And there's a part in Doctors where we leave the main character, and a second character is introduced, and the second character is the person who was inside of a side character. So it's this bizarre kind of baton passing in the narrative, that you have to move forward with this character that you just met. And so that page where we meet her I had to put something there that would get us on board for this new character. And I had this page that's like the yes/no page, where every no
Tammy and her father.
Gives a future yes more power. And I kept moving that page. We get that page, I think, right, as soon as early in the book as possible, to meeting Tammy. And I think that page is like a necessary key to get us on board Tammy, because it's not like in Psycho where the character just dies. There's also still Miss Bell, who stays through the rest of the book. So there was, I don't know, that felt like some kind of, I don't know, in my mind, something I learned about film was applicable into making Doctors, especially kind of that character switcheroo moment.
Yeah, that's interesting because from what I can remember when I first read Doctors, and there was that shift, I guess about a third of the way into the book, where we kind of drift from Miss Bell into Tammy and then her father and then Clark. I didn't get the feel that this had all of a sudden turned into something like a Robert Altman film, right? Where the camera goes to one character, then another character in his or her situation, and then back to a third or back to that first. But I think you did handle very well more characters and more storylines as things branched out from Miss Bell and her situation.
Thanks. Yeah. And that book, was definitely, it was like putting together like a puzzle, the plot of that book. And I really wanted it to be as tight as possible.
Yeah, because it's definitely an intriguing premise that we have these doctors who have developed a technology to where they can go into a dying person's mental state, their awareness, their brain in some way, in order to help bring them back from, as you put it, the fade to black.
Yeah, you know, it's an afterlife story. Mm-hmm. That was the goal, to do that. We have all of these afterlife stories from different cultures. So what would be an afterlife story that makes sense to me now? So the technology stuff is just an excuse to get to an afterlife story. And part of it is that when they get brought back, that it's a traumatic experience, that then the person always dies shortly after is kind of an important part of the premise. Yeah, an afterlife genre. There's kind of side genres I think are interesting. Like Body World is, I consider like it's a telepathy story, and telepathy is different than science fiction. It's, you know, it's kind of about how people think or how they experience the world, and so it's, I don't know. I thought for some reason there's kind of, I don't know. Yeah, subgenres of stories interest me.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things that I alluded to at the beginning of our interview is that, I'm fascinated by the way that the subject matter of your work changes with each new publication, it seems to me. In other words, you know, the afterlife story that we get with Doctors is very different from what we get with Cosplayers, which is very different from the family drama of The Bottomless Belly Button, which is very different from New School and from Body World, so on and so forth. Now, coming back to Cosplayers, you have subtitled this book, I guess it's a subtitle, The Perfect Collection. Now, I know what you refer to, especially given what you're writing about here in terms of the subject matter, by perfect collection. But for those who are unaware of the world of anime, manga, they pick up Cosplayers and see that this is called Perfect Collection. They may get a completely different take on that subtitle.
Well, that's okay, because part of why I liked it is I remember when I first saw it written, I was kind of perplexed by it. You know, when I was a kid and I saw whatever the, you know, eight man after Perfect Collection, I thought, how is this perfect? You know, mm-hmm. I thought it was intriguing. So yeah, it was. I guess it was a translation of something in Japanese, but they used Perfect Collection as a descriptor a lot. Like it's very deliberately call things a perfect collection. I guess viz, I think Dark Horse did it. A lot of Manga Video, all of these places would call things perfect collections.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, it's like something was serialized or a mini series, and then it was perfectly collected into a single VHS or a single smaller format graphic novel. It seemed like a good idea but I didn't put it on the cover, mostly because I feel like the fewer words on the cover, the better.
Right.
But it's on the case underneath the dust cover. It says Perfect Collection, and it's on the title page.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that just recently you were at the Strand bookstore in New York. Where else do you plan to go, I guess, to help publicize cosplayers? Any events, cons, festivals?
I have to go to, because High School Sinking is playing these film festivals now, I'm going to all of these film festivals, and I'm trying to schedule events if I can in that area. So I know the next one for sure will be at the Beguiling in Toronto, September 13th, and it'll be right after a screening of High School Sinking across the street from Beguiling. So that'll be fun because I love the store, and I hope that the screening goes well, and then maybe we can get some people to walk from one to the other and check out the store.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that we have this Cosplayers Christmas special to look forward to later this year. Are there any other Dash Shaw projects, comics projects on the horizon?
I'm working on things. I have something that was excerpted in the last Kramer's Ergot. Mm-hmm. So that's part of a book that I still have a couple more chapters to do, 3 more chapters of that. But I don't have like a day. I don't have a release day. I'm going to just, I don't have a release to plug.
Well, you got a lot for us to chew on right now with both Cosplayers and this new film that people in select areas will be able to see. My entire high school is sinking into the sea. Dash, I want to thank you for the time and for being on the Comics Alternative.
Thanks for having me. Thanks. That was great.
That was fun. I got to learn some information about his cosplayer comics that I didn't know before. I know that you and I had discussed Cosplayers #1 when it came out back in the spring of 2014. And, you can find what originally appeared in issue 1 and issue 2 and in last year's Free Comic Book Day Hip Hop Family Tree, there was a cosplayer story there. But he took a lot of those stories and made them a little different in one way or another, kind of tweaking the art. But there's also new cosplayer story. I mean, really good stuff. But as we heard in the interview, he's not through with cosplayers.
Yeah, that's good to hear. We got the Christmas special coming out and possibly more stuff somewhere in the future.
Yeah. I had a great time talking with Dash Shaw. Thank you again, Dash, for being on the show. And if you want to find great discounts on some of Dash's comics, then as Andy mentioned at the top of the show, visit the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Their website is dcbservice.com. You can't find better prices than theirs. And then after you do get your comics at dcbservice.com, get in touch with us and let us know what you think about my conversation with Dash Shaw. If you go to the website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message from the comfort of your own computing device through SpeakPipe, which is really easy to use. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right, or you can get a hold of us by email. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can get a hold of us individually. I'm Andy at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com.
And we also have our Twitter feed. It's at the number 2 guys with PhDs.
That's right, but you can also find us elsewhere on social media, such as Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on TuneIn. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify, and if you're an Android user, on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, by going to our website, which is comicsalternative.com.
That's right, all the ways to get a hold of us and find out what we're doing.
That's right, and we've got more interviews lined up for the next several weeks, so be sure to check back and listen up for those. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy. See ya.